Trump turns hostile, calls India dead economy. America launches tariff war on India.
Prime Minister Modi is a friend of mine, but they don't do very much business in terms of business with us. They sell a lot to us, but we don't buy from them. You know why? Because the tariff is so high. They have one of the highest tariffs in the world.
Trump repeats Indo-Pak ceasefire claim.
Just days ago, my administration successfully brokered a historic ceasefire to stop the escalating violence between India and Pakistan.
Modi government holds its ground.
दुनिया के किसी भी नेता ने भारत के ऑपरेशन रोकने के लिए नहीं कहा.
Time for India to look beyond Washington. Trump tariff war roundtable.
Hello and welcome once again to the weekly roundtable. We're just over halfway through the year 2025, but one global leader's presence dominates geopolitical events in every corner of the world, it appears. Donald Trump, the US president, has become the great disruptor of 2025, who's cast a shadow now on India and the Modi government as well. From taking credit for the Indo-Pakistan ceasefire after Operation Sindoor to now threatening tariffs and penalties on India and even calling India and Russia dead economies, Donald Trump is grabbing all the headlines. Dealing with Trump is just one of the many foreign policy challenges now that the Modi government faces. Indeed, from dealing with Washington to negotiating with Beijing to Moscow, Islamabad, how does India navigate an uncertain global environment? That's the big foreign policy debate that puts the focus squarely on what the Modi government has done right, what it's done wrong, what it can do in the future. Joining us on this special roundtable, Yash Sinha, distinguished diplomat, K.C. Singh, another distinguished diplomat, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, Jayant Krishna, Senior Fellow, Center for Strategic and International Studies based in Washington, D.C., Daniel Block is Senior Editor at Foreign Affairs Magazine and contributing editor, The Washington Monthly. He's in New York. And Andrew Latham, Scholar of International Security at Macalester College in St. Paul, United States. Thank you all very much for joining us. Over the next hour, we will look at various dimensions of the challenges that India faces now on the foreign policy front. And the big one, of course, which has triggered the debate is the T factor, Donald Trump. So my first big question, has Narendra Modi's Trump outreach simply failed to yield results? Did we get Trump wrong is the question I want to raise. Yes, Sinha, why don't you take that question? Have we got him wrong? We started with Namaste Trump, Howdy Modi, lots of bonhomie, and now we've got a president who every single day seems to target India.
Rajdeep, thank you for having me on your show. I could only answer your question with a counter question. Who has got him right? I mean, if you're just limiting yourself to tariffs and you see the results in terms of countries who have reached an agreement or an interim agreement, you will realize that they've had a lot to give up. Now, most of these, look at the developing countries. You've got Vietnam with a 20% tariff, and in return, zero tariff for American goods. You have Indonesia, Philippines with 19%, and even the allies. I mean, you look at EU, 15%, Japan, 15%, and of course, the UK gets away with 10%. But these are developed economies. So if you're limiting yourself to tariffs, I would certainly think that we are just begun. The game has just begun. I don't think we can judge whether the foreign policy or the outreach of the Modi government has been a success or a failure. If you're judging in terms of the larger picture, the foreign policy, again, there are many imponderables. As far as the US is concerned, I mean, the deals that they have made with Pakistan or are in the process of making with Pakistan is should not, in my opinion, decide the larger picture as far as relations with South Asia and India in particular are
Right.
concerned. Because I think the whole policy of the US has been to keep India as a counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific, or at least to prop up. There was bipartisan support. If that has changed, then we'd like to hear about it, because just today we heard that the engine, the GE engine for the Tejas Mark II is now going to be made available. So I think we are hearing different noises, different reactions from different people in this administration. We'll have to see how
Right.
the deal, the trade deal, if there's any, pans out, because the 25th of
So,
August, we expect a team to come from Washington.
so you're pressing the pause button on whether we've got Trump right or wrong in our foreign policy. But Daniel Block, give us your perspective. Do you believe that India has handled Donald Trump the right way? There are those who believe that flattery is the right way to handle Donald Trump. Others are saying just look him in the eye, as some believe the Chinese have done. What's the better way? Have we got Donald Trump right or wrong here in India?
Well, I think as the previous guest said, and other guests will say, it is hard to get Donald Trump right. He is a chaotic figure. His policymaking is in many ways characterized by inconsistency and constant back and forth. And so to some extent, the story is not done. That being said, I'm looking at the things that were promised by the Modi government and what's happened so far. And I think that to an extent, New Delhi has overpromised and underdelivered when it comes to the United States.
What does that
There
mean?
was a lot
Be
of talk.
specific. When you say overpromised and underdelivered, give me an example.
Sure. So there was a lot of talk about how, the friendship, the personal friendship between Trump and Modi was going to result in a kind of flowering of relations, in positive trade deals. I remember when Liberation Day, as it was called, happened and Trump first announced he was enacting these massive tariffs, that he in the same conference said that Modi was a friend and that that might lead to a preferable deal for New Delhi. None of that has happened. Other countries have managed to secure trade deals with the United States, so it's not impossible. We know it can be done, and India is not one of them. Now, again, it's hard and there's a lot of road left to travel, but so far, India doesn't appear to have gotten any real preferential treatment from the United States.
Andrew Latham, you're joining us there from Macalester College. I remember you coming on a program a few months ago saying, look, Trump is the ultimate transactional politician. You've got to deal with him as you deal with a businessman, not so much a politician. Is that where perhaps India needs to course correct when you deal with a Donald Trump? Treat him as a businessman, not as a political leader who has any friends at all. He has only his own interest at stake.
Well, I think that's right. Ultimately, it's important to look at Donald Trump. And when we look at him, to be charitable, he's quite mercurial. He's blowing this way one day and blowing the other way the other day. Carrots one day, sticks the next. He is a negotiator. He is a businessman, and he does think in transactional terms, but he also thinks in maximizing his leverage. And I think that's what's going on now. I think Modi got him right. I think India got him right, partly. But to get him right, you have to understand that sometimes bonhomie was a term that was used in the introduction. Sometimes it's all bonhomie and backslapping, and other times it's face slapping, and that's just the way Trump operates. Look, he's been emboldened by the deals that he's done with Japan and the EU and the UK, et cetera. He got pretty much what he wanted with respect to most of those countries. And I think he thinks he can get away with that with India if he just applies a little more pressure. But he's going to bump up against two walls really quickly, one of which is that there are internal political dynamics, which mean that India cannot reform its agricultural sector, for example. Certain sectors are just irreformable in the short to medium term. And he wants to have on Team America both India and Pakistan, which is very, very difficult to pull off, especially in light of recent events, but also in light of the past 80 years of history. So he wants his cake and he wants to eat it too. And I'm afraid somebody needs to tell him it's one or the other. The other thing I'll say very, very quickly is that sometimes I think people focus on the headlines and not so much on the fine print. There's an American trade delegation at the end of August going to India to pretty much finalize at least a semi-deal. And lots of Indian sectors, including electronics and whatnot, are going to be exempt from these tariffs anyway. So, let's take a look at the fine print too.
Jayan Krishna, in that sense, should we press the pause button till the trade negotiations are over before we know whether we got Donald Trump right or wrong?
See, we are dealing with a president who's very, very unpredictable, Rajdeep. If you look at the history of our relationship with the US, the thaw started during Prime Minister Vajpayee's time, and the big quantum leap actually happened during Dr. Manmohan Singh's time. With the civil nuclear deal and a plethora of other initiatives that started. And from that time onward, it has been going from strength to strength. See, the reason why this relationship is strategic is because of multiple factors. For example, there's an expanding Indian market with far better purchasing power than what it used to be, and US wants market access to it. We have seen that how entire world is looking at alternate supply chain destinations beyond China, right? And India has been a front runner, right? Indian diaspora is so strong in the US, right? And India is perhaps the best country which is poised to address the Chinese economic aggression, So despite all these things happening and despite the so-called friendship between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, he has imposed this kind of a levy, 25% plus an undisclosed amount of penalty for us doing business with Russia. So I think it's very unfortunate. Initially I thought it's more of a pressure tactics. It's more of a weakening the BATNA, and BATNA is in negotiations is actually the best alternative to negotiated agreement. It is weakening India's BATNA but today what he has said about India and Russia being failed economies and so on and so forth, I think is clearly it's not a statesman-like behavior at all. So two ways. One is that he's completely frustrated with the process. He has not seen that kind of a sweetener which he saw while negotiating with China, with Japan, with EU, with the UK, and so on and so forth. One could be that reason. Another reason is some people during negotiations they want to play the extreme negative actor, right. And he could be doing that as well. So it's very, very difficult. But I don't think India as a country should retaliate. It doesn't help. It doesn't blend with the character of Indian diplomacy at all. I think we should do whatever it takes to fast track the negotiations, so that even if the full-blown BTA doesn't happen immediately, at least an interim deal is announced, and
right.
and which sort of does away with the with this 25% tariff.
Okay, well, has Modi's Trump outreach failed to yield desired results? Is it too early to dismiss India's initiative in the manner in which we've dealt with Donald Trump, the much touted personal chemistry between the Prime Minister and Donald Trump?
Look, these are the 2 or 3 elements which have governed the Modi government's approach to America. One is an assumption that US treats India as a vital factor in balancing China. That's been a constant for the last 10 years, and that's why India got a long rope. It's not, we haven't started buying Russian oil now. We've been buying it for some time. So the previous administration did not. They made some noise about it, but largely left India alone. Second one is the role of the diaspora. It's been mentioned here, but we don't hear much from the diaspora. Has the diaspora intervened with Trump? Or are they really on the back foot because of what's going on, the supremacist white targeting of anybody who's colored in America? So all these assumptions are now in question. So as a result, and then there is a personal chemistry. I mean, hugging, shaking hands, all that is fine. But I think what Trump is doing is completely transactional. And as has already been said on your program, I think he's got emboldened by the fact that the Europeans have climbed down. Even though there's some dissension, the French Prime Minister called it a dark day. So there is not happiness in all the countries in Europe, but they've accepted it. But it's very interesting that 2 countries, that's EU, 27 countries of EU and the Republic of Korea, they're the other ones with a deal. They have a similar kind of approach. The Koreans are saying we will invest $350 billion in America and buy LNG worth $100 billion. The Europeans are saying we'll invest $600 billion worth in America and buy energy worth 750 billion. But then, as people have said, that there's no mechanism to implement it. So I think what countries are doing is, and interestingly, the European Union has said, we will do this over the next 3 years, which is the remainder of Trump's term. So I think where India probably has gone wrong, and the Treasury Secretary has spoken today, and he has said that India is not a global player, it's dealing with Russia, and they've been dragging their feet. Now that's coming from the Treasury Secretary.
Right.
I don't think it should be taken lightly. They are not happy. So very clearly, Trump has been told that India is dragging its feet and not moving and not willing to join the ranks of countries which have lined up to sign the deals, which consists of about half of the ASEAN countries, all of Europe. But then there are countries which haven't done that, which is Brazil. And coincidentally, it's all the 5 countries of the BRICS. He's imposed 50% tariffs on Brazil today. He's gone after South Africa. China, Russia are there, and then there is India. So on the one side, India is talking of RIC, that's Russia, India, China. You're talking of BRICS. So Trump is targeting BRICS. He's forcing India to align with the countries which are making the deals, and therefore not keep a leg in both the camps.
Right.
Which is what India has done. What India has done so far. And I think that is the strategic part. So it is not that easy to resolve it, because you'll have to climb down. He's not going to simply compromise unless he gets what he wants. And I think his negotiating team has told him that India is dragging their feet.
Well, some would say dragging their feet. Others would say India is standing up for its national interests. We'll, of course, see when the actual trade deal, if at all it materializes, whether it's in India's interests or not. But through this discussion already, we've put out the R word. We started with the T word. I want to come to the R word, Russia. Should India end its neutrality in the Ukraine-Russia, and I'm going to put the G word also, Gaza wars, because there's a sense that, yes, Sinha, India hasn't taken a strong stand either way. They've sat on the fence on Ukraine-Russia, and now the US president is calling India out, saying, you can't buy oil from Russia. There have been those who've been critical about our approach towards Gaza as well, that we haven't taken a moral stand. But to Russia first, principally, do you believe that that is an intrusion in our strategic autonomy when a US president says, you've got to stop buying oil from Russia or I'm going to impose penalties on you?
Rajdeep, I think, there is a history now as far as Ukraine and Russia are concerned. I mean, it's ironic that the US itself is buying uranium and rare earth from Russia. You have Europe buying gas from Russia. So how can they tell us not to buy oil from Russia? Now, obviously, they have got benchmarks, $60 per barrel. We've not exceeded that amount. And our petroleum minister is on record saying that since we import 86% of our energy needs, and we are a developing country, we buy from where the cheapest. It will help us in our economic growth and development. And we have about 40 odd suppliers. So I think it's not, Ambassador K.C. Singh would remember that when Iran was under sanctions, we were still buying oil from Iran. We opened escrow accounts, etc., but the amounts were dwindling. They came down. So, it's not that we don't have any experience on how to handle this. Of course, this is much bigger. It's the United States. It's the biggest economy. And I, for one, am quite baffled as to, the fact that you want to punish, even BRICS. You're talking about BRICS. When President Trump talks about BRICS, it's India that's actually holding the line as far as the so-called, in inverted commas, de-dollarization is concerned, or a separate currency is concerned. So I think, it's really quite ironic, but I'll wait and see. I'm not going to sort of
so let's
give my final verdict now.
Let me get Daniel to give us a US perspective. Explain, Daniel, why suddenly is Donald Trump so worried about India purchasing oil from Russia? Is it simply a tactic, a negotiating tactic? Is he trying to send a message out, not just to New Delhi, but somewhere to Moscow as well? Is he increasingly frustrated with Vladimir Putin and then taking out the frustration on Prime Minister Modi and India?
I think it's a good question and a difficult question. I think the answer you suggested, that would be my best guess as to what's going on, is that it's both. It's a combination of the two factors you laid out. On the one hand, this is another way for him to get at India economically and to indicate his frustration with the way India is conducting trade talks and to try and amp up the pressure, as it were, on India as the two states conduct trade negotiations. So I think that's column A. And then I think column B as well is his increasing frustration with Vladimir Putin. And this is a very recent and relatively rapid shift we've seen with Trump. I mean, for the first several months of his administration, he was quite sympathetic to Russia relative to previous US presidents. And now he's not. And once he kind of changed his mind on it, he decided to apply pressure relatively quickly to get back into the business of arming Ukraine in a pretty forceful way, and now to try and find new ways to amp up economic pressure on Russia. But again, as everybody said throughout this program, the president is mercurial. He changes his mind often. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a week he's changed his tune on Russia and on the sanctions related to it.
Andrew, do you believe that India should, at least on penalties being or threatened against India for trading in oil with Russia, for purchasing oil from Russia, should India simply be sticking to its stand, saying Russia has been an ally of India or a great supporter of India through the years, and therefore India will do what is in India's interest?
India will do what's in India's interest, just like every other country on the face of the earth. And what we see happening here, I think Trump and his administration understand that this is a multipolar moment. It's not the unipolar post-Cold War era when America could do whatever it wanted. It's got contenders, peer competitors, China being the most obvious, and then one rung down a bunch of other competitors. What he doesn't understand is some of the knock-on effects of that, one of which is multi-alignment. That countries around the world, from Saudi Arabia to India, even to Canada in some ways, are willing to be on Team China once in a while and Team USA for some issues. And that's both a function of multipolarity, but it's also, in India's case, a function of a long history. India is dependent on Russia for replacement parts for Soviet-era weapons, for example. It also has to be said that the global South doesn't treat the war in Ukraine the way Europeans and North Americans do, as the most important thing that's ever happened in human history. I've heard Indians say, that's Europe's problem, it's not our problem. We're going to do what's in our best interest, which is not condemning Russia necessarily or overtly, and buying their oil at discount rate, because that's what's good for Indian consumers and Indian industry. That makes perfect sense to me. But the logic of that seems to be lost on President Trump and the boys. They seem not to understand. There are things they can negotiate with India, and then there are things that are non-negotiable with India. Some of them have to do with domestic politics, and some have to do with geopolitical orientation, this multi-alignment phenomenon, which has deep, deep roots in Indian foreign policy.
Let me take off from what Andrew's just said to my third question, which is, in a multipolar world, can India look beyond Washington? Is this a moment for India to look at a world that doesn't simply look at America as the sole global policeman as it once saw itself, and thereby forge its own alliances well beyond the United States? Jan Krishna, you take that first.
So, Rajdeep, the fact is, India is surely doesn't believe in laying all eggs in the American basket. And if you look at our FTAs have already been signed with the UK, with Australia, with the United Arab Emirates. Talks have started, even with Canada, and talks are at some stage of progress with the European Union. So, we are doing that. But the fact is, the sheer size of the US, right? See, US is India's second largest trading partner, next only to China. And it is the only major country with whom we have a trading relationship where India has a trade surplus in its favor, which means we export more to the US than what we import from the US, right? And if you look at the foreign direct investment, the single largest chunk of foreign direct investment that comes to India, it has been coming to India the last several years has been from the US. The US has been the #1 FDI country for us, So I think, you can't ignore them. The fact is that, you have to start looking at alternatives. And India always does that. China is the larger trading partner. US is only #2. But you can't ignore it altogether. The best thing is to carry on diplomacy, to carry on negotiations, fast track that,
but carry out fresh alliances as well, presumably. Find new alliances, new FTAs to sign. K.C. Singh, do you agree with that? And I link it also to the earlier question that I asked on Russia, that the United States, if it's going to try and put pressure on India in this manner, India is free to look at its own alliances and build partnerships that just are not America-centric.
Look, Rajdeep, it's changed so much in the last 2-3 weeks. Firstly, President Trump has changed his stance towards Ukraine. Earlier, he was taking a position which was tilting towards Putin. That slowly his frustration grew. It's come to a point where he's now even started resupplying arms to Ukraine. So some of his aggressive approach on Russia and vis-a-vis India on the Russian issue has to do with Ukraine. And that's why his big statement which came out, in which he said 25% tariffs, it ended with India, Russia, and the relationship. And in capital, he's saying this is not good, and so on and so forth. So that is driving him. I think he wants peace in Ukraine. Remember, he had said, I will take care of the Ukraine war within 1 day of becoming a president. Now it's nearly 7 months. So he's completely frustrated with that. He wants success there. And I think he feels that India and China are indirectly helping Russia conduct their war in Ukraine because they're buying the oil and the foreign exchange goes there. The Chinese have immediately reacted and said, no, we are not going to stop buying from Russia. India has kept quiet. We have not reacted to that statement. But the fact remains that there is a change in Trump's stance as far as Russia is concerned, and hence the aggression. Now, moving to multipolarity, I think that had begun happening many years ago. And I think what's happened is EU doing a deal, because we could have gone towards multipolarity and handling America a different way if all the major countries and groups were willing to deal with each other. BRICS alone can't do it. The Europeans have gone and cut a deal. So that major pole is now no longer available, not at least for the next 2-3 years. So as half of ASEAN is gone, the others are also in the queue. So the space is shrinking in which you can function without America. Therefore, we'll have to cut a deal and do what most of the countries have done, what I was telling you, promise things. They're promising things, much of which is not going to be implemented. They want to just create a bridge, get rid of Trump for the time being. They know by the time the midterms come in America, he may be weakened. He'll get distracted. So you're buying time, a year and a half, maximum 3 years, promise things to him, etc., which do not harm you, do not affect your domestic politics, insulate your domestic politics, but there'll have to be compromises.
Okay.
You can't give the impression to him that you're dragging your feet.
But should we, yes, in a multipolar world, look beyond Washington, strengthen, for example, BRICS? Is that a possibility given the fact that you're dealing with this mercurial American president?
I would not advise that at all, because I don't think BRICS can be a substitute for the United States. The United States by far is the most preeminent power. And with India, we've had over the last 3 decades, or at least the last 2.5 decades, successive US presidents have wooed India, and our relationship has looked very strong and sound. And it's only now that we are confronted with the transactional president who wants it's either my way or the highway. But, I agree with Ambassador K.C. Singh. There are many things that we can promise, and I'm sure our negotiators may have, I don't know whether they did, promise the moon, because we actually are in a position to promise the moon as far as buying American goods are concerned, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's defense equipment, so there's a lot of areas where we Boeing aircraft, aircraft.
So the general
Boeing cannot produce
consensus,
so many aircraft.
so the
So,
broader
we
consensus is that you need to engage with America. That for all the multipolarity in the world, America still remains the country that you need to engage with. Given
absolutely, I think
where,
we must.
which turns me to my fourth big question, and some believe it's the elephant in the room. Is China still India's biggest foreign policy challenge? I'm pivoting slightly away from Trump and the United States to our big neighbor and a country which many believe is the one that we will have to look at very closely, both as a competitor and a potential trading partner in the years ahead. Daniel Block, there's been so much of talk in recent times about China plus one and the need for India to be seen as an alternative market to China. At the same time, China is an adversary. We've even seen in Operation Sindoor how China was seen to have fused its military with the Pakistanis. Is China still the major foreign policy challenge, even more imponderable than a Donald Trump?
I would say that China is certainly a much bigger threat to India's interests than is Donald Trump. I mean, not to downplay the challenge of dealing with a president like Trump. It's obviously significant and incredibly difficult in many ways. But, the United States doesn't, for example, lay out claims to parts of India's territory, which is something that China has from time to time done. The United States doesn't have a land border with a land border with India. The two states' militaries have never scuffled. So I think it's in an entirely different category from the challenge with the United States, the challenge with China.
Should we be spending more time? I mean, is there a way which, the United States has sometimes seen India as a bulwark against China, that we want to build Washington wants to build a strong relationship with India in a way to checkmate China. Is that realistic anymore? Daniel?
I think that the American security community broadly still sees it that way. The question and the issue in many ways is Donald Trump himself, with his very transactional view of the world and his intense focus on tariffs and the various trade balances between countries. That's getting in the way of that kind of general trend in American foreign policy. But I think at a latent level, that still exists, that desire among the United States to have India act as a kind of bulwark against Chinese power.
And Andrew, do you agree with that, or do you believe as time has gone, Trump is happy to to do a deal with Beijing, and could that be in India's best interests or not?
No, I think Trump and his administration see China as the principal threat. There's a danger there of falling into Cold War 2.0 thinking, and I think that's got some dangers of its own. But there are some analogies and some parallels there. If there are two great powers, it's the US and China. And what they're vying over is not just market share, and it's not just territory around China's periphery, or even the South China Sea or Taiwan. Really, what's going on, and the BRICS are a manifestation of this, is an attempt to rewrite the rules of international order, the ones that the Americans put in place post-World War II that got globalized at the end of the Cold War, right? It's that unipolar moment. It used to be called the liberal international order, but now, of course, we have to call it the rules-based international order. And it's being challenged. De-dollarization, which one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, is one manifestation of that. The whole Bretton Woods thing, which made the US dollar the reserve currency for the world, et cetera, et cetera. There's a great deal of anxiety in the US about that, but there's no confusion at the upper levels of the foreign policy establishment that China is the principal threat, that India, in fact, is frustrating China's efforts within BRICS to do de-dollarization and to rewrite the rules. There is a powerful, if somewhat residual, belief that India can still be drawn unambiguously onto Team USA. That will be a bulwark against China, both in the Indo-Pacific and at the level of the rules-based international order. Here's where the self-destructive piece comes in. First of all, Donald Trump is saying things which are alienating the Indian populace. American presidents have been uniformly popular in India for a long time. This one is not, according to the polling data. And then he thinks he can have Pakistan on Team America as a kind of co-equal and deal with them and apologize for their support for terrorism and promise to invest in their oil infrastructure, et cetera. I just don't see how the United States can have it both ways. And if it were up to me, if I were president, and I never will be because I wasn't born in this country, but if I were, I would opt for the Indian option over the Pakistani option any day of the week.
And yet we are seeing Casey Singh, this concept of cap, China, America, Pakistan. The American president has spoken about doing a big deal with Pakistan, oil, which he says Pakistan could one day sell to India. Are you getting a sense that here is a US president who is using China in a way that is, again, inexplicable? How are we to read this? How are we to read this Pakistan-US tango and China within it?
I don't think President Trump is looking at the bigger picture. I think he's got different pieces. At a given moment, he's dealing with those pieces and he's trying to get an advantage there. And that was the suspicion always, that we didn't know why General Munir was invited for a lunch, why he reached out to Pakistan, even after Pahalgam, which has emerged now. Because he has said in his latest statement that they've got oil and I'm going to be naming a company which will go and extract it. No, it's not much oil. According to some reports, it must be maybe under 1 billion barrels, which is not all that much of oil. But it shows you that there is a combination of greed, of transactional nature, of getting economic benefits, and countries are exploiting that. I think what India needs to do is to exploit his weakness for investment, for money, for making money, whether his family or America, all these larger picture is just not in the picture. I think you stop looking at that, he thinks India will balance China. He'll go and talk to China. He'd rather get a deal from China than use India to balance them. I don't think he's looking that far or in that massive geopolitical sense.
So Jayan Krishna, should India be worried that here is a US president who seems to be cozying up to the Pakistani establishment on one side and is happy to deal with Beijing on the other?
See, as far as Pakistan is concerned, frankly, I don't think it's for serious consumption. I've seen different U.S. presidents honeymooning with Pakistan here and there, doling out some money, here and there, largely to keep India on its toes. But beyond that, I don't see there's much that India needs to be worried about. But if I just switch over to something which you said earlier, about China, India ties and so on and so forth. A lot of people would say that China is not a country which can be trusted by Indians. But I for one, I am all for a much tighter economic integration with China. If you look at post-COVID, as many countries were looking at relocating their manufacturing supply chains to destinations other than China. India was a front runner, but India did not get as many investments as we should have got. One reason was our manufacturing supply chains were not integrated with China at all, right? Had that been the case, things would have been different. And I somehow feel people say that, what about geopolitical ties? I would think that, if our economic ties improve with China, the geopolitical ties would improve automatically. Because in today's day and age, economic...
That's an interesting viewpoint. That's an interesting contentious viewpoint, that if our economic relations with China improve, that will improve political relations. You agree with that, yes, Sinha? Because China remains the elephant in the room. And we've opened up once again visas to Chinese. 5 years after Galwan, we are putting the relationship back on track. But can it really ever be on track? Can we, given what happened during Operation Sindoor, clearly China was backing Pakistan through and through?
Rajdeep, I'm quite clear in my mind that China is our biggest challenge. And I'm consciously not using the word threat, though I'm inclined to do that also. Because I've served in the neighborhood. I know exactly what China has been doing and what China did in Operation Sindoor, which you referred to. Now, we have to manage that relationship. We have had a relationship with China that spans thousands of years. So we cannot let a few incidents completely derail our relationship. So I think managing the relationship requires certainly economic cooperation wherever it's possible, where there is no real threat to the national security. We should certainly be dealing with China. But you must also, if you talk about the deficits and trade imbalances, the biggest trade imbalance that we have is with China. And so I think we need to address these issues, obviously talk to China as best as we can. But I'm afraid I don't see, this whole rig thing emerging. It may as a temporary sort of measure, but I don't see rig being up in Asia, and certainly not China.
Okay, so let me turn to my final big question on today's foreign policy roundtable. Has India's Vishwaguru image taken a hit in recent times? Vishwaguru, global leader. Andrew, why don't you kick this one off? Because in the last few months, we've hoped that Pakistan would be isolated. That's not quite happened. We've been accused by some for not taking a clearer stand on the terrible tragedy unfolding in Gaza. And in general, there's a sense that our image as some kind of a global leader has taken a bit of a hit. Do you agree with that? That India and the belief that we could be a leader of the global south, and in general, we are not seen in the same light by the rest of the world as we would like to see ourselves?
I think you're onto something there. My sense is that the Indian political establishment sees India's natural role in 2025 as leading the global south. And who does that put it in competition with? What other great power wants to pretend that it can lead this thing called the global south? Well, it's China. So there's a friction there which is not going to go away anytime soon. What India, I don't think, sees itself as is a replacement for the United States as the quarterback, as it were, or the policeman, if you like, of this unipolar moment, this global Bretton Woods, free trade, et cetera, the American system that was put in place and globalized it in 1991. I don't think India aspires to that, but India does aspire to regional leadership. I was tempted to say hegemony there for a moment, which means it's going to butt heads with Pakistan and with China, not with the United States. And it sees itself more broadly as a leader, a natural leader of the global south, post-colonial, et cetera, et cetera. And whose head is it butting up against in that respect? China's, not the United States, maybe Donald Trump, but the US, India's participation in the BRICS has been one of stymieing Russian and Chinese efforts to rewrite the rules of global order. So it's not an adversary or an enemy in that regard. I think the United States would be well served if it supported India's bid for some kind of leadership in the Indo-Pacific, let's call it hegemony, and some kind of leadership in the global south. I'd much rather India playing that leadership role than Russia or China, that's for sure. So I would be on India's team and not insisting that they be on Team USA.
Daniel, what's your view? Has India's Vishwaguru image taken a hit? Is there a gap between our ambitions and the reality on the ground? And I want you to focus particularly on those who also are questioning now India's seemingly neutral stand on what's unfolding in Gaza, for example.
Well, I'd say that there's probably no country in the world that's viewed internationally the same way it wants to be viewed internationally. And India is certainly no exception to that. The idea of it being a Vishwaguru was always, I think, a little bit overstated. And I think it's become more overstated. Now it's irked various neighbors in different ways. It's obviously, as Andrew was saying, irritated China. A lot of that, of course, is deliberate. When it comes to Gaza and the Middle East, I think it's hard probably for India to claim leadership of the quote unquote global South while simultaneously not being that active when it comes to what's happening there, given that it is a huge issue in so much of the world, and especially outside of the United States and Europe. And it's a growing issue there as well, particularly in Europe. So yeah, I think it was always overstated. And I think it has become more overstated, particularly as India has become a little bit more aggressive and belligerent in its own region, as it's aspired to, if not hegemony, some form of leadership. Right. And to some extent, that's what happens.
Jayan Krishna, do you believe that we need to temper down a bit of the Vishwaguru rhetoric and get real at times and just focus on a political realism that's now dominating the world?
Yeah, absolutely, Rajdeep. This Vishwaguru stuff is nothing but a self-proclaimed position. Who in the world calls us Vishwaguru? We call ourselves Vishwaguru, but the fact is we are far from getting there. We have not declared Russia the aggressor in its war with Ukraine. Our stand on Israel versus Gaza versus Iran, remains ambiguous. So I think there are lots of things, and the fact is, we may be flexing our muscle that we have become the fourth largest economy, right? But the fact is, where do we stand in terms of per capita income? There our rank is 141 out of 194 nations. What about human development index in the country? Our rank is 130 out of 193 nations. Hunger index, our rank has improved a bit, but it's still an appalling 105. Pollution indexes. So whatever you look at, I think we have a long way to go. Just by proclaiming that we are Vishwaguru, it doesn't help. A lot of fundamental course corrections have to do. A lot of decisive stands, our earlier positions notwithstanding, I think we have to do in the international space, and a lot of course correction in the way our economy is managed if we really want to live up to the Vishwaguru. I mean, how many Nobel laureates?
The flip side, of course, Yasina, is that many believe that Prime Minister Modi, who's aggressively traveled across the world, meeting leaders, even in some of the smaller countries that previous Indian leaders hadn't gone to for several decades, has tried to sort of use the Indian diaspora, use our soft power to reach out to countries around the world. Has it succeeded to the extent that we believe in, or has it been a mixed record in your view?
You see, for me, I mean, I don't see India as a Vishwaguru in terms of hard power. I see India as a Vishwaguru, as a civilizational Vishwaguru, and not just, I mean, it's not me only.
But if we are a civilizational Vishwaguru, shouldn't we be taking a stronger stand when, for example, innocents are killed in Gaza?
No, so we are taking a stand in our national interest. So you must understand that every time that the West sort of goes one way, we won't be following that unless it's in our national interest. But we have, for instance, we've restated our position as far as the two-state solution for Palestine goes. Recently at the UN, we did vote in a resolution for, I think it was the situation in the Middle East. So it's, we have to do a fine balancing. And we cannot afford to forget our friends. So coming back to your Vishwaguru question, certainly not. We are not a Vishwaguru in the sense of hard power, but we are a Vishwaguru as a civilizational power, and which has been recognized by many, Tolstoy, Einstein, and others. So I don't want to go into that. So I think it's not the self-projection so much. It is what we are striving to become.
Okay.
And obviously, we are not there yet. But I'm confident at some point we will be there.
Okay. KC Singh, let me give you a final word on that Vishwaguru question. Are we, is the image not matching quite the reality? And in a sense, therefore, has 2025 been a bit of a wake-up call? Even for External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar, who was being toasted by the chatterati in this country as someone who was sort of speaking up and standing up to the West, has all of that got to be now sort of balanced with a sense of realism?
Rajdeep, I think if India was the Vishwaguru, it really was in the first about 15 years after India's independence. As decolonization took place, Commonwealth group of countries were there. Nehru was kind of treated like a Vishwaguru until the Chinese deflated him in 1962. So it's China
Nehru has come into the discussion on Indian foreign policy after 50 minutes. He came 14 times in the Prime Minister's speech in Parliament.
There is absolutely no doubt that in the 50s till 1962, and probably one of the reasons that the Chinese attacked India was they saw the stature of Nehru out of line with India's economic and military strength. And they wanted to deflate India. That's why they came in and they went back. So that was the high point, was in the 50s. If you had Indochina, they wanted somebody to come and be on the Indochina Commission. India was invited. India was into all those positions. We were all over Africa. We led the Commonwealth. We helped create the Commonwealth. So as the countries decolonized, they came into that tent. Now, who talks about Commonwealth today? You take the Islamic world. And I think the problem is the majoritarian politics domestically. You can't move away from liberal democracy and a secular system and then expect the entire Islamic world to be with you. You can't just go with Israel and a few Abraham Accords countries and say you are Vishwaguru. You're not Vishguru. There are a whole lot of Islamic countries which are watching you carefully and saying how you deal with the minority in India. So you can't be one thing at home and try projecting a different thing abroad. I think that contradiction comes out. So I think it's a much smaller international image than we had in the 50s, than probably we even had after 1971, when Mrs. Gandhi was seen as someone who took on America and etc. That kind of, I don't think that kind of leadership is any longer possible, nor is it desirable, because China has penetrated the South, the developing world, Belt and Road Initiative. They got money, they got deep pockets. They're all over Africa. They're all over the developing world. So to suddenly go and seek leadership there, I think we need money in the pocket. It's not going to be that easy. And that's why Quad started moving in that direction.
Right.
They realized that you can't be just talking of simply containing China without putting money on the table or without reaching out to the developing countries. And that's been on the Quad agenda.
Right.
And probably India will take it up. So it's a world in transition in which nobody is a leader. I think at the moment, do you think Trump is a global leader? I mean, his stature is nowhere near what Kennedy was. There's just no comparison at all. So as a result, I think we are in a world where transition is taking place. The old post-World War II system is being attacked by America itself, and the Chinese want to change elements of it. They want free trade, but they don't want many other parts of that system. They don't want to reform the Security Council. They will not let India come in there. So it's ultimately, you will be a wish guru if you enter the Security Council, if you have greater votes in the World Bank, IMF, if you have presence all over the world, and countries respect you as a liberal democracy, flying your flag high as a functioning liberal democracy. Without that, you can't be a wish guru.
I want to just simply say to what I just heard from K.C. Singh, touche, because I think there are many strengths that India has in the 21st century. And one of those strengths is the belief that we are or were a liberal democracy, and that perhaps is a standout, particularly when you look at the authoritarian regime that still exists in Pakistan, a military regime, an army state, and in China, where many freedoms continue to be crushed. Those are India's values, India's core values. And hopefully America too will recognize, and India will recognize that there's an America beyond Donald Trump. And Donald Trump and his administration will realize that in the future, India still remains a country that can be a bulwark, not just against China, but as a country that represents some of the finer values of a democracy. But for that, we have to get our own act together, both on the political front and indeed even on the economic front. The more economic heft you have in this multipolar world, the more the world treats you seriously. Therefore, plenty to ponder upon for those who look at foreign policy closely. To all my guests who've joined me from across the world, thank you very much for joining me once again on a global roundtable. To you, the viewers, for watching. Jai Hind, Namaskar.